Everyone thought Bernie Madoff was the safest investor on Wall Street. He wasn't investing a single dollar. For 20 years, he ran the largest fraud in American history, and the people who finally turned him in weren't federal agents. They were his own sons. Queens, New York, 1938, a working class Jewish neighborhood where fathers worked two jobs and sons learned early that money wasn't something you talked about. It was something you chased. Bernard Madoff watched his own father's small business collapse under creditors. He decided, young, he'd never be on that side of a closed door again. By 22, he'd saved $5,000 and founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. No pedigree, just a folding table and ambition. And here's the twist most people miss. Bernie was actually good. Not fraud good, legitimately good. He helped pioneer electronic trading and served 3 separate terms as chairman of NASDAQ. This wasn't some backroom hustler nobody trusted. This was a man Wall Street looked up to. That reputation became the perfect cover. Quietly, on a separate floor, Bernie built something else, a private investment advisory arm. No advertising, no cold calls. Just word of mouth wrapped in exclusivity. Getting Bernie to manage your money wasn't a transaction. It was an invitation into a club. I heard you can get in with Bernie. Depends who's asking. I've got 200,000. My daughter's wedding is in 6 months. I want this to work. Everything Bernie touches works. And it did, consistently, suspiciously consistently, 10, 12, sometimes 15% returns every single year, regardless of what the market was doing. Booms, recessions, crashes. Didn't matter. Bernie's line just kept climbing, smooth as a heartbeat that never once skipped. Here's a basic rule of investing worth remembering. Real markets don't move in straight lines. Volatility isn't a flaw in the system, it's proof the system is real. A portfolio with 0 down years, decade after decade, isn't impressive. It's a red flag, wearing a very expensive suit. One analyst noticed, in 1999, Harry Markopolos ran Bernie's numbers and told the SEC, in writing, it was mathematically impossible. The SEC investigated, then investigated again. Found nothing, because Bernie wasn't trading anything at all. New investor money never got invested. It paid off older investors who thought they were earning real returns. It's called a Ponzi scheme. And here's the business principle that matters. Every Ponzi scheme is a math problem with only one ending. It requires exponentially more new money every single year just to pay off the old promises. There is no version of this model that survives contact with a bad year. It's not a strategy. It's a countdown clock. His client list read, like a who's who of American wealth. Hollywood names, Nobel laureates, university endowments, Jewish charities that trusted him because he was one of their own. They called him Uncle Bernie. At home, his sons Mark and Andrew worked at the firm too, but 2 floors up in the legitimate trading division in the light. The fraud operated behind locked doors most employees never entered. Bernie kept his sons close, proud, and completely in the dark. By the early 2000s, the fund's paper value passed $10 billion, then 30. New York's elite didn't just invest with Bernie, they begged to. Then came 2008. The financial crisis triggered a wave of investors everywhere pulling money out at once. And Bernie's fund, the one immune to every crash before it, suddenly faced something it was never built to survive. Withdrawal requests it couldn't cover because there was no real money behind the numbers. Just 20 years of fabrication, catching up all at once. By December, he needed $7 billion to meet redemptions. He had a fraction of that. On December 10th, 2008, Bernie called his sons to his Manhattan penthouse, told them it was about early bonuses. Strange request. They came anyway. Dad, what's going on? Sit down. It's all been one big lie. The advisory business. It's a Ponzi scheme. There's nothing left. It's just numbers. There's nothing behind them. Mark and Andrew sat in stunned silence. The man who taught them everything about honest business had built an empire on a lie so large it would become the biggest financial fraud in American history. They didn't hug him. They left the penthouse and called a lawyer that same night. His advice was immediate. Report it now. The next morning, Mark and Andrew Madoff called the FBI on their own father. Federal agents arrested Bernie Madoff on December 11th, 2008. He didn't resist. In some quiet corner of himself, he'd been expecting it for years. The scale investigators uncovered was almost impossible to comprehend. Around $65 billion in fabricated account values, real losses to real investors landed between 18 and 20 billion, thousands of victims. From Hollywood royalty to retirees who'd handed over entire life savings, to charities that shut their doors overnight because the money they thought they had was never real. In March 2009, Bernie pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. No trial, no negotiation. He told the courtroom he'd been living a nightmare for years, unable to find a way to stop what he'd started. The judge called it extraordinary evil and sentenced him to 150 years, the maximum allowed. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. It ended quietly, inside his own family. Mark Madoff spent 2 years living under a scandal he hadn't caused but couldn't outrun, hounded by investigators, buried under public scorn just for sharing his father's name. On December 11th, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest, Mark took his own life in his New York apartment. Andrew Madoff spent his remaining years fighting cancer while trying to rebuild some fragment of a life separate from his father's name. He died in September of 2014 at 48. Bernie Madoff outlived both of his sons. He died in federal prison in April 2021, having served just over 12 years of a 150-year sentence. Here's the part that should sit with you longer than the $65 billion ever will. Bernie Madoff didn't get caught by regulators who had been circling for a decade, or by whistleblowers screaming into the void. He got caught because his own sons chose honesty over loyalty in the span of one impossible night and turned in the man who raised them. We'd all like to think that if we found a lie that size inside our own family, we'd know exactly what to do. Mark and Andrew didn't get the luxury of imagining it. They lived it, and the cost followed them for the rest of their lives, however short those lives turned out to be. Maybe that's the real fraud Bernie Madoff committed, not the $65 billion, the two sons he convinced for their entire lives that they could trust him.